You wake up in the heart of medieval Ukraine. The air smells of smoke, the church bell echoes through the village, and survival isn't guaranteed. Before we dive in, smash that like button, drop a comment, and subscribe if you're ready to live history like never before. This isn't just a story. This is your day in Kievan Rus. Medieval Ukraine's warriors had a secret weapon, more powerful than any sword. It wasn't made of steel. It was made of tradition, from childhood initiation rites to death-defying battle strategies. This is the untold story of how the Cossacks maintained their legendary fighting spirit for centuries. Your first meal in medieval Ukraine would begin with everyone at the table shouting over each other like madmen. Not because they were rude, because they believed silence during meals invited disaster. Families deliberately clanged spoons, stomped feet, and raised voices to create constant chatter. Archaeologists find twice as many broken bowls in Kievan Rus settlements compared to neighboring regions, evidence of this violent table etiquette. The noise served as protection against nechista sila, unclean forces that supposedly gathered in silent spaces. Housewives taught children to bang their wooden plates 3 times before eating, while elders kept conversations flowing without pause. Breaking this rule meant risking evil spirits sneaking into your porridge. Farmers claimed quiet meals led to spoiled harvests, and merchants blamed silent breakfasts for failed trades. Morning rituals extended beyond the table. Before sunrise, women performed a peculiar cleansing rite with bread. They'd wave a loaf around each family member's head 3 times, then burn it in the hearth. Charred bread crusts appear frequently in Ukrainian archaeological sites, often near thresholds where these rituals occurred. The burnt offerings supposedly trapped household troubles in the flames. Stranger still was the first word superstition. Whoever spoke first after waking determined the day's luck. Families appointed children as designated morning chatterboxes, their innocent voices considered purer conduits for good fortune. If a visitor arrived before the ritual words were spoken, they'd be barred from entering until proper greetings concluded. Sleeping arrangements played into these beliefs too. People never made their beds immediately upon rising. Smoothing blankets too soon supposedly trapped the sleep demon inside, bringing nightmares. Instead, they'd air out bedding for hours, sometimes beating the straw mattresses with sticks to chase away lingering spirits. Excavations show medieval Ukrainian homes consistently had bedding storage areas separate from sleeping spaces, a practical response to these superstitions. The noisiest ritual involved chasing dawn shadows. When morning light first entered through the window slump hole, someone had to stand in the patch of light and stomp vigorously. This kicked away any shadow creatures that had clung to the family overnight. Footprints worn into wooden floorboards near windows suggest this was a daily occurrence in most households. Food itself carried spiritual weight. Leftover crumbs from breakfast weren't simply discarded. They were carefully collected in special clay pots called dobrodieki. These crumb containers were later emptied at field edges as offerings to field spirits. Archaeologists occasionally find these pots buried near ancient property boundaries, still containing petrified bits of centuries-old meals. Both all this chaos served a practical purpose beyond superstition. The morning noise and movement helped ward off the bone-chilling cold of Ukrainian winters. Stomping feet circulated blood, while constant conversation kept people alert in dim, smoky interiors. What began as spiritual practice doubled as survival tactic in a harsh climate. The rituals persisted even as Christianity spread. Priests complained for centuries about peasants feeding demons with their breakfast customs, but the traditions adapted rather than disappeared. Charred bread offerings became blessings, and noisy meals were rebranded as celebrating God's abundance. This blending of old and new would define Ukrainian spirituality for generations. These mourning customs reveal how medieval Ukrainians saw the world, a place where every action, no matter how small, carried cosmic weight. A dropped spoon wasn't just clumsy, it was an omen. A quiet moment wasn't peaceful, it was dangerous. Tomorrow, we'll look at what happened when these superstitions followed them out the front door. Your fingernail clippings could get you killed in medieval Ukraine. People guarded them like state secrets, collecting every scrap in small pouches they wore around their necks. When the pouch filled, they'd burn the contents under a new moon while whispering protective charms. The fear wasn't just about witchcraft. Warriors believed enemies could use clippings to track them down. Soldiers heading to battle would file their nails directly into campfires to leave no trace. Hair received similar treatment. After combing, women carefully gathered loose strands into clay pots sealed with beeswax. These pots were buried under doorsteps, creating what amounted to medieval security systems. The idea was that any evil entering the home would get tangled in the hair first. Archaeologists find these pots intact centuries later, the hair inside still preserved. In rich households, servants had the grim job of collecting hair from multiple family members to strengthen the protection. Personal items carried even greater risks. A lost belt buckle could mean disaster. They believed your strength drained away with it. People sewed tiny belts for babies immediately after birth, often making them from the mother's own hair for extra power. If someone found a discarded belt on the road, they'd spit on it 3 times before picking it up to neutralize any trapped malice. Home designs incorporated these beliefs at every turn. Carpenters deliberately left one visible knot in each beam as an eye to watch for danger. Families slept with their heads pointing northeast, the direction morning light first entered Slavic homes. Turning your bed the wrong way supposedly invited night demons. The worst sleeping position? Facing south, which was reserved for corpses laid out before burial. Thresholds became security checkpoints. Before entering any dwelling, visitors had to blow lightly over their left shoulder, a gesture believed to scatter invisible followers. Homeowners often buried horse skulls under their doorsteps to absorb any lingering bad intentions. In wealthier houses, you'd step over an iron nail embedded in the threshold for purification. The fire and salt ritual happened every new moon. Families would extinguish all household flames, then relight them using sparks struck from a special flint kept wrapped in red cloth. They'd toss a handful of salt into the new fire while reciting ancestral names. This wasn't just spiritual cleansing. The salt acted as a primitive disinfectant in smoky, close-quartered homes. Any food prepared before completing this ritual was considered unsafe to eat. Children learned protection spells alongside basic arithmetic. Before going outside, they'd touch the family's bread oven 3 times to carry its warmth as spiritual armor. Young girls wore necklaces strung with garlic cloves and wolf teeth, while boys carried pouches of graveyard dirt for protection. These weren't playthings. Mothers tested their children monthly by pretending to curse them, ensuring the charms still worked. Even farming tools needed safeguarding. Plows were fed with small offerings of honey at planting time. Sickles got wrapped in fabric woven during a full moon when not in use. The most valuable implements, like blacksmith-forged axes, were married to their owners through a ceremony involving shared blood and mead. Language itself became dangerous territory. Words like hunger or sickness couldn't be uttered during meals. Instead, people used coded phrases, calling illness the unwelcome guest, or referring to death as the long journey. Breaking this verbal etiquette required immediate spitting over your left shoulder 3 times to cancel the offense. In medieval Ukraine, death wasn't the end. It was a carefully managed transition that required elaborate precautions. When someone died, their family immediately covered all mirrors and reflective surfaces. They believed the soul could get trapped in reflections, unable to move on. This practice persisted even as Christianity spread, with priests complaining about peasants holding souls hostage in their polished metal mirrors. The body preparation would unsettle modern sensibilities. Families washed the corpse with water collected from 3 different sources: rainwater, river water, and melted snow. Each type served a purpose. Rainwater purified, river water carried the deceased toward the afterlife, and snow water ensured they wouldn't burn in the next world. The washing always happened at a crossroads, never inside the home. Archaeologists find concentrations of iron nails at ancient crossroads sites, leftovers from the ritual, where tools used in washing were immediately abandoned to avoid spiritual contamination. Burial positions revealed social status and cause of death. Most people were laid on their backs, but warriors went face down with weapons in their hands, a position meant to confuse evil spirits about which way the fighter was facing. Suicides were buried at property boundaries with heavy stones on their chests. Excavations near Lviv uncovered 17 such burials along a single medieval farm's border, each with distinctive river stones weighing down the remains. The grave goods tell unsettling stories. Every burial included a, quote, road meal, a clay pot filled with the deceased's favorite foods, but prepared without salt. Saltless meals were thought to be the only kind ghosts could consume. Wealthier graves contained miniature tools and weapons, scaled-down versions of real items. A boyar's tomb near Kiev held a 2-inch iron axe and a 1-inch silver chalice, perfect replicas of his earthly possessions. These weren't symbolic. They believed the dead needed functional items in the afterlife. The most shocking practice involved speaking graves. Families would visit burial mounds and pour specially brewed beer into pipes leading to the corpse's mouth. Then they'd listen for responses. A gurgle meant approval. Silence signaled displeasure. Some burial sites show evidence of these pipes being maintained for generations, with newer clay sections spliced into older ones. The beer wasn't just ceremonial. Chemical analysis shows it contained psychoactive herbs like wormwood, possibly inducing visions in the living participants. Mongol invasions changed these rituals in brutal ways. After battles, Ukrainian warriors were often buried with their severed right hands placed near their heads. This wasn't Mongol cruelty. It was a local adaptation. People believed the right hand needed to be, quote, ready to fight again in the afterlife. Mass graves from the 1240s near Chernihiv show this practice on a horrific scale, with hundreds of right hands carefully positioned beside skulls. The Polish-Lithuanian period introduced new tensions. Wealthy families started burying their dead with coins in their mouths, a Greek tradition adopted through Catholic influence. But Orthodox peasants resisted, considering it a foreign practice. Instead, they placed spindle whorls, or weaving tools, in the corpse's hands, maintaining traditional women's roles in the afterlife. Cemetery excavations show these class divisions clearly. Elite graves with coins, peasant graves with tools, all within the same burial grounds. Quote, children's burials were the most ritualized. Infants went into the ground, wrapped in cloth woven from their mother's hair, with poppy seeds scattered around the tiny body. The seeds served dual purposes, symbolizing sleep and preventing the child's spirit from wandering. Teenagers were buried with gaming pieces or dolls, objects they'd need to grow up in the next world. A heartbreaking excavation near Kamyanets-Podilsky uncovered a 12-year-old girl buried with 37 carefully carved bone dolls, one for each year she would have lived had she reached old age. Quote, the wake lasted precisely 40 days, not the modern 3-day affair. Each evening, the family placed a fresh bowl of water by the hearth for the deceased to wash. Every morning, they checked for disturbances in the water. Ripples meant the dead were present. After 40 days, they performed the doorstep-breaking ritual, smashing a clay pot filled with the deceased's hair and nail clippings across the threshold. This final act severed the connection between living and dead. Cossacks developed their own brutal traditions. When a warrior died far from home, his brothers in arms would bury him with an empty flask and a broken sword. The message was clear. He'd fought until his weapons failed and his supplies ran out. Some battlefield graves contain up to 7 broken swords, a communal offering from surviving comrades. Most elite Cossacks received sky burials. Their bodies placed in oak boats set adrift down the Dnieper, burning arrows shot after them to ignite the pyre mid-river. These practices weren't just about mourning. They were a complex system of spiritual protection, ensuring the dead didn't linger as malevolent forces. Every ritual, from the careful positioning of bodies to the specific grave goods, served to maintain balance between worlds. Next, we'll see how these beliefs about life and death shaped the living, particularly in how they prepared their children for war from the moment they could walk. Cossack boys didn't have childhoods. They had boot camps disguised as playtime. By age 5, they were already training for war, with rituals that would make modern parents faint. The first test came early, being thrown into an icy river in midwinter. If the boy scrambled out on his own, he passed. If he needed help, he'd repeat the test weekly until he succeeded. Villages kept records of these swimming grades, and boys who failed too often risked being barred from warrior status. Their training grounds weren't nice flat fields, but the most treacherous parts of the Ukrainian steppe. Instructors made boys ride bareback through thickets that tore at their legs, across ravines where one misstep meant broken bones. Unlike European knights who trained in controlled jousting tournaments, Cossack boys learned combat by ambushing each other unexpectedly. Older warriors would stage midnight raids on the children's sleeping quarters, forcing them to react instantly to surprise attacks. Weapons training started with sticks, but quickly progressed to real blades. A common exercise involved 2 boys standing opposite each other, throwing knives into the ground between them, taking 1 step closer with each throw. The first to flinch lost. Archaeological digs at old training sites reveal patches of earth studded with hundreds of small knife nicks, showing where generations of boys played this high-stakes game. The most dangerous rite happened at age 12, the silent hunt. A boy would be sent alone into the forest with just a dagger, ordered to return with a wolf pup, not the pelt, the live animal. About 1 in 5 boys came back with injuries, but records show nearly all succeeded eventually. They'd keep these wolf pups as companions, believing the animals gave them keen senses in battle. Many Cossack units had wolves living among them well into the 18th century. Physical tests were only half the preparation. Boys also underwent mental conditioning through sleep deprivation and hunger challenges. They'd be woken at random hours to recite complex family lineages or navigate obstacle courses in complete darkness. During harvest feasts, when everyone else gorged on food, initiates sat watching with empty plates, learning to function while starving. What set Cossack training apart was the blood oath ceremony at age 14. In a secret night ritual, boys would each cut their left palm with a ritual dagger, letting the blood drip onto a shared loaf of bread. Each would eat a piece containing the other's blood, symbolically becoming brothers. This wasn't just symbolism. The mingling of blood created real social bonds stronger than family ties. Warriors who broke this oath faced execution by their own sworn brothers. The initiation culminated in the Silent March, a 60-mile trek where speaking meant failure. Boys carried heavy packs filled with stones, following an elder who led them through swamps and forests. At journey's end, they'd receive their first real weapon, not a practice sword, but a battle-ready saber stamped with their clan mark. From that moment, they were considered men, liable for military service. These practices created warriors with eerie battlefield endurance. European mercenaries wrote accounts of Cossacks marching for days without rest, or fighting wounded when other soldiers would have collapsed. The childhood training built more than physical toughness. It forged mental resilience that made them nearly unstoppable in combat. Girls underwent parallel training focused on survival skills and medicine. While not warriors, they learned to track, hunt small game, and treat battlefield wounds. Many Cossack women became expert snipers, using the same childhood target practice techniques as the men. Their training focused on protecting the home front, a practical necessity when invading armies could arrive without warning. The system proved brutally effective. Cossack units often defeated better-equipped forces through sheer endurance and cohesion. That cohesion came from shared suffering. Every warrior knew his brothers had endured the same trials. When facing impossible odds, they didn't see enemies. They saw another challenge to overcome, like the wolf hunts and knife games of their childhood. This training regime continued well into peacetime, evolving into folk games and competitions. Some elements survive today in Ukrainian martial arts traditions, where instructors still teach the old step riding techniques and combat breathing methods. The blood oath may be gone, but the mindset remains. Endurance through shared struggle, victory through unwavering loyalty. Next, we'll examine how these hardened warriors let off steam, and the drinking rituals that could kill the unprepared. The Cossack drinking ritual began with a simple rule. Once the horn was passed, you drank until it was empty. No sipping, no pauses. The vessel itself was a test, a curved ox horn that held nearly 2 liters of liquid with no flat bottom. If you set it down before finishing, the remaining liquor would spill out in shame. These weren't casual drinking sessions, but structured tests where failure meant more than a hangover. It could cost you status in the Brotherhood. New recruits faced the 3 Fires challenge on their first night. They'd drink a cup of vodka, then eat a spoonful of red-hot pepper paste, followed by another vodka. The cycle repeated 3 times without breaks. Surviving this earned you the right to sit at the far end of the table. Veterans watched closely. Those who showed pain were given extra rounds as punishment. Accounts describe young Cossacks passing out face first into their plates, while others roared with laughter. The containers themselves carried meaning. The chiasha, a wide communal bowl, forced drinkers to cradle it with both hands like a baby, making spillage impossible. Passing it required eye contact and a formal declaration of brotherhood. More infamous was the min, an enormous copper vessel requiring 2 men to lift when full. Drinking from it was a privilege reserved for distinguished warriors on special occasions. Some of these vessels survive in museums, their interiors still stained dark from centuries of use. Hierarchy was maintained through a brutal drinking game called Last Man. Participants sat in a circle while a barrel of kvass or vodka was placed in the center. Each took turns drinking full cups until someone either refused or passed out. The last conscious man got first pick of food and booty after battles. It wasn't uncommon for multiple participants to die from alcohol poisoning during prolonged sieges when the game became a daily ritual. Weddings produced the most extreme drinking customs. Before the ceremony, The groom had to drink with every male guest at least once, sometimes over 100 cups. If he remained standing, the wedding proceeded. If not, the bride could call it off. Some grooms trained for months beforehand, slowly increasing their tolerance with foul herbal concoctions meant to strengthen the liver. Widows' accounts mention men who died during these pre-wedding tests, their bodies quietly removed before the ceremony. Aiga. Battle preparations included mandatory drinking rites. The night before combat, every warrior received 3 measured cups, one for ancestors, one for fallen brothers, and one for future victory. These were drunk in complete silence. Any man who spilled a drop was beaten with sticks by his comrades. The ritual served a practical purpose, identifying those who couldn't hold liquor before they endangered others in battle. The deadliest challenge was the black mark test. A leader would drop a coal into a full cup of vodka. The drinker had to finish it before the coal stopped sizzling, usually about 12 seconds. Succeed and you earned a place near the commander. Fail and you wore a mark of shame for a year. Medical knowledge being what it was, nobody realized swallowing burning coals caused internal bleeding. Several burial mounds contain skeletons with distinctive throat burns from this practice. Hospitality customs could be equally lethal. Guests were expected to drink whatever their host provided, no questions asked. Poisoning was a constant threat in frontier territories, so this demonstrated trust. Travelers' journals describe visiting Cossack settlements where suspicious hosts served intentionally contaminated alcohol just to test the visitor's resolve. Surviving the drink proved you came in peace. Dying meant you were a spy. The culture despised drunkenness outside rituals. Men caught drinking alone faced public whippings. The communal aspect was everything. Alcohol was a tool for building unity, not personal escape. This explains why their strongest liquor was always shared. Zubrivka, their signature drink, was vodka infused with dozens of herbs, each adding toxicity along with flavor. The recipe varied by battalion, creating distinct flavors that functioned like unit identifiers. Winter intensified the rituals. During long nights in snowbound camps, they played ice throat. Men took turns drinking freezing cold vodka, then standing outside shirtless until their body heat melted a circle in the snow around them. The last one with an unbroken circle won. Frostbite casualties were common, but surviving meant you could endure extreme cold, a useful battlefield skill. The drinking culture persisted because it worked. These weren't just parties, they were pressure tests that forged unbreakable bonds. Men who survived drinking rituals together would later stand firm in battle lines when others broke. That same alcohol that killed the weak also helped create one of history's most formidable fighting forces. Weapons practice came next, and it made the drinking look tame. When not testing their livers, Cossacks trained with blades using methods that left permanent scars, both physical and mental. Their approach to combat preparation would make modern special forces trainers wince. The Cossacks didn't train for battle. They trained to break men. Their preparation methods made Spartan drills look gentle. Every exercise served 2 purposes: building skills and weeding out the weak. Horsemanship drills were particularly brutal. Boys as young as 8 practiced hanging sideways from galloping horses while shooting arrows at targets. Miss 3 shots in a row, and you'd be tied to the saddle upside down for the rest of the day's ride. They called their elite riding test the cross. A warrior had to ride full speed through a field of wooden posts while dodging swinging sandbags meant to simulate enemy blows. The final challenge? Jumping a ravine blindfolded, guided only by the sound of a whistle. Historical accounts mention at least 1 in 20 candidates failed this test permanently, either from broken necks or trampling. Those who survived earned the right to ride at the front in battle formations. Weapons training was even more extreme. Saber practice didn't use wooden sticks like in Europe. Cossacks trained with real blades against living targets, usually chickens or goats at first. As skills improved, they'd graduate to paired drills where both fighters used sharpened weapons. Protective gear was considered dishonorable. A training session wasn't complete until at least 3 men needed stitches. Their philosophy was simple. If you couldn't handle practice cuts, you wouldn't survive real combat. The most feared exercise was called the wheel. A group of warriors would form a circle around a trainee, taking turns attacking him from different angles. The trainee had to block or parry every strike while slowly rotating. If he stopped moving, the attacks continued until he collapsed. Some circles used blunt weapons. Others used live steel, depending on how cruel the instructor felt that day. Cossack lore says the great leader Ivan Serko once survived a 100-man wheel for 3 continuous hours. Psychological conditioning was just as harsh. Warriors spent nights alone in the steppe with nothing but their weapons, forced to stay alert for imaginary enemies. Some were made to stand waist-deep in freezing rivers for hours, reciting battle plans without stumbling over their chattering teeth. The test wasn't just endurance. It was about maintaining focus through physical agony. If you complained, they'd tie you to an ant nest and pour honey on your face. Ranks were earned through public trials called shows of worth. To become an officer, a Cossack had to complete 3 impossible tasks in front of the entire host. One common challenge was riding through a narrow lane while dodging arrows fired from both sides. Another involved wrestling a bear while reciting military codes verbatim. Failure didn't just mean humiliation, it could drop you back to the lowest rank. Several skeletons found in Cossack graves show old combat injuries alongside fresh ones, suggesting some men died attempting these promotions. Leader selection was the deadliest ritual of all. When a commander died, potential successors had to pass the gauntlet. They'd be stripped to the waist and forced to walk between 2 lines of warriors who lashed them with whips. The candidate who walked farthest without falling became the new leader. Some gauntlets stretched over half a mile. The record holder, Petro Kalnyshevsky, supposedly made it 1,200 paces in 1762, despite having 3 broken ribs from earlier that day. Winter training was especially cruel. Units would march barefoot through snow until their feet bled, then soak them in salt water to toughen the skin. Night exercises involved digging trenches in frozen ground with bare hands. The few who completed the course earned wolf fur boots, the ultimate status symbol. Archaeologists have found Cossack remains with distinctive scar patterns on the fingers and toes, consistent with these exercises. Their endurance shocked foreign observers. Polish chroniclers wrote about Cossacks fighting for 3 days straight without sleep, their eyes kept open by sticks wedged under the eyelids. Ottoman records describe warriors who continued firing arrows with multiple spear wounds. This wasn't natural toughness. It was the result of systematic conditioning that blurred the line between training and torture. What's remarkable is how these methods created actual military advantages. Cossack units could march farther, fight longer, and withstand conditions that broke regular armies. Their pain tolerance alone gave them an edge in close combat. When others would retreat from injuries, Cossacks kept advancing through wounds that would cripple normal men. The training also produced uncanny coordination. Warriors who'd survived the wheel together could fight back-to-back instinctively. Those who endured winter marches could predict each other's movements in battle. This wasn't just individual toughness, it was collective resilience forged through shared suffering. Modern military psychologists would recognize some methods. The sleep deprivation and stress exposure resemble special forces training, but Cossacks took it further by making failure truly dangerous. When your training might actually kill you, battlefield risks seem mild by comparison. This warrior culture sustained itself through generations, not despite the brutality, but because of it. Every scar was a lesson, every death a warning to the survivors. The system produced men who could charge into cannon fire without flinching, because they'd already faced worse during practice. Their secret weapon wasn't any particular tactic or weapon. It was the willingness to push preparation beyond what any sane person would endure. That same willingness carried over into their psychological warfare tactics. Beyond physical prowess, the Cossacks mastered ways to dismantle enemy morale before blades even crossed. Their reputation for unpredictability wasn't an accident. It was carefully cultivated through calculated displays of madness. The Cossacks' real weapon wasn't their blades. It was fear. They engineered terror so precisely that enemies often broke before the first arrow flew. Their appearance alone caused chaos in enemy ranks. Warriors grew their hair long under tall fur hats, shaping it into a shaggy silhouette that made them look half-beast in battle's haze. Mustaches hung below their chins, waxed to sharp points. When Polish infantry first faced these wild-looking horsemen at Zoftivody, reports say 3 columns broke formation just from the sight of them approaching. Their battle preparations included psychological conditioning for both sides. Before major engagements, Cossack units would stage midnight demonstrations outside enemy camps. They'd ride circles around the perimeter howling like wolves, setting fire to grass upwind so smoke drifted into sleeping soldiers' tents. Several Ottoman siege accounts mention troops abandoning positions after 3 nights of this treatment, convinced they faced demons rather than men. Sound became a calculated weapon. Cossack drummers didn't keep time. They created disorientation. Each unit had its own rhythm, played slightly out of sync with others to produce a jarring effect. Horns blew at random intervals, while warriors shrieked ululating cries. During the 1649 Battle of Zborov, this acoustic assault caused a winged hussar charge to stall mid-field as horses panicked from the noise. Polish riders had to dismount and fight on foot. They weaponized silence, too. Some attacks began with the complete absence of sound. Hundreds of riders advancing without commands, their horses' hooves wrapped in felt. The first warning enemies got was arrows slicing into sentries. Swedish records from the siege of Bati describe sentries going missing without alarm, only for Cossacks to appear suddenly inside the camp gates at dawn. Their reputation for unpredictability became a strategic asset. While European armies followed established combat rules, Cossacks changed tactics between battles. One engagement might involve orderly cavalry charges. The next would see warriors pretending to flee while leading pursuers into hidden pits filled with upturned scythes. After the 1652 Battle of Bateau, where this trap decimated Polish forces, subsequent enemies hesitated to give chase even during genuine retreats. The most effective tactic involved calculated displays of insanity. During negotiations with the Crimean Khanate in 1628, Cossack diplomats suddenly began laughing hysterically, then calmly informed the Khan they'd poisoned his wine. As panic spread, they hadn't. Warriors outside set fire to their own supplies while chanting pagan incantations. The Khan's army withdrew without a fight. This blend of psychological manipulation and showmanship became known as their madness strategy. Prisoner treatment amplified their fearsome image. Unlike other armies that ransomed captives, Cossacks often released certain prisoners deliberately, the most visibly traumatized ones. These men would spread stories of bizarre tortures that weren't actually used. By the time of the Khmelnytsky uprising, Polish units were surrendering en masse rather than risk capture, convinced they'd face horrors that mostly existed in rumor. Their clothing concealed dark, practical jokes. Warriors sewed small bells into their coats that jingled faintly during marches. At close range, the sound was almost subliminal, just enough to put enemies on edge without identifying why. Others wore necklaces of dried Turkish ears that rattled when they moved. Ottoman correspondents frequently mention this unsettling detail as proof of Cossack savagery. The chaos masked meticulous planning. What looked like wild charges were carefully timed diversions. While enemies focused on the main force, smaller units would be tunneling under positions or poisoning water supplies. After their famous victory at Korsun in 1648, Polish survivors realized the apparent disorder of Cossack lines had concealed flanking maneuvers that took 3 days to prepare. Night operations preyed on primal fears. Cossacks would cover themselves in river mud to mask their scent, then infiltrate camps to slit exactly one man's throat per tent, leaving others to wake beside a corpse. The uncertainty of being next shattered discipline better than any mass assault. Russian garrison logs from the 1630s showed desertion rates spiking after these ghost killings. They harnessed superstition strategically. Before battles against Christian foes, Cossacks would display stolen communion wafers on pikes, knowing most soldiers believed this caused automatic damnation. Muslim opponents faced warriors deliberately eating pork during sieges, flaunting their disregard for Islamic taboos. Both tactics targeted cultural fears deeper than physical danger. The psychological warfare reflected Ukrainian identity itself. Living between empires forced them to master asymmetrical combat. Their tactics weren't cruelty for cruelty's sake. They were survival mechanisms refined through generations of fighting stronger powers. The madness had method. Convince every potential invader that occupying Ukraine wasn't worth the cost. This legacy persists in modern Ukrainian military doctrine. During the 2014 conflict, soldiers reportedly played recordings of wolves howling to unnerve separatist forces, a direct echo of Cossack night terror tactics. The same psychological principles still work centuries later because they target universal human fears rather than temporary technologies. Their greatest trick was making enemies think they faced berserkers, when in fact they faced brilliant tacticians. The wild hare hid keen minds. The chaotic charges concealed precise timing. What looked like barbarism was performance art with lethal consequences. European observers who dismissed them as savages learned too late that the real danger wasn't Cossack ferocity. It was Cossack intelligence weaponizing that perception. These warriors understood something modern militaries still study, that breaking an enemy's will matters more than breaking their lines. Their methods seem extreme until you realize they often won wars without major battles, simply by being terrifying enough that nobody wanted to fight them. This calculated psychological dominance bled into civilian life too. The same communities that produced these warriors also developed birth rituals so intense they'd make modern parents blanch. When a Cossack child entered the world, the whole village participated in ceremonies that balanced celebration with brutal practicality. A Cossack birth wasn't a private family matter. It was a days-long village production where everyone played a role. The moment labor began, neighbors would burst into the house uninvited, tossing garlic cloves into corners and drawing charcoal circles around the bed, not to help but to form a spiritual barrier. Childbirth was considered so dangerous that multiple women had to simultaneously spin wool threads around their hands while chanting, the crisscrossing strands supposedly trapping evil spirits in a tangled web. The mother endured rituals that would horrify modern midwives. She drank teas laced with iron nails to harden the baby, and during difficult labors, male relatives sometimes fired guns into the hearth to scare away demons. Village records from 1634 mention a case where the shooting accidentally set the roof on fire, but the baby was born healthy, so they kept doing it. New mothers weren't allowed to sleep lying down for 40 days. They dozed upright in special chairs to prevent their souls from drifting away. Everyone brought symbolic gifts, not practical ones. The blacksmith presented a miniature scythe, the miller offered flour mixed with grave dirt, and the local beekeeper contributed wax containing dead bees. These weren't toys, they were magical safeguards. The scythe taught the child to respect tools. The death-infused flour represented life's cycle, and the bee wax prevented kidnapping by fairies. Families preserved these objects for life. Archaeologists find them tucked into adult Cossacks' graves decades later. Naming ceremonies were public ordeals. The whole village crowded into the house while the priest recited names. When the baby reacted, likely just gas, that became its name. Unlucky infants got stuck with choices like Pilip, derived from to spit, or Nechapire, meaning unexpected, based on random twitches. If the child showed no reaction, they'd place it briefly in the cold ashes of the hearth, then try again. Some babies earned multiple names this way, leading to court cases later when grown men argued over which name was legally valid. The strangest ritual involved the placenta. Unlike neighboring cultures that buried it, Ukrainians had the village's oldest woman carry it around the house 3 times, then boil it with herbs. The resulting broth was secretly mixed into the family's food over the next week, a practice so taboo that even literate Cossacks later lied about it to ethnographers. Modern soil analysis near old homes still shows unusual mineral levels from generations of placental disposal. 3 days after birth came the stone test. They'd place the newborn on a large rock near the village outskirts overnight. If it cried constantly, they brought it home. If it stayed quiet, they presumed evil spirits had replaced the real baby with a changeling, and performed an exorcism involving fermented goat milk. Parish records from Volhynia show at least 20 rejected infants were later adopted by other families after these ordeals. Community participation peaked during the first bath. Villagers took turns adding ingredients to the water. Not herbs, but bizarre items like a wolf's tooth, a burned book page, and stolen hay. The bathwater was later thrown onto fruit trees to transfer the baby's vitality to the harvest. Splashing meant good luck, so people jostled to get wet. Wealthy families hired guards to prevent overly enthusiastic well-wishers from stealing the water altogether for their own fields. The father's role was deliberately humiliating. He had to wear his wife's clothes for a week while she recovered, even doing her chores. This wasn't just about role reversal. They believed masculinity was contagious. By absorbing female energies, he'd ensure his son avoided Cossack culture's biggest fear, effeminacy. Some men took it further, publicly breastfeeding carved wooden dolls to really sell the act. Church officials hated this practice, but could never stamp it out. Protective symbols followed the child for years. Mothers sewed tiny bags of salt and lead into clothing hems, while fathers carved sleeping marks into cradle posts, hidden grooves recording how many nights the child had survived. Before Christianity took hold, some villages would cut the baby's gums with a bone needle dipped in honey, marking them as part of the tribe. Later, priests replaced this with silver crosses rubbed in honey, but the concept remained, sweetness and pain together from day one. Unlike Western christening gowns, Ukrainian swaddling clothes incorporated alarming features. Strings of dried mole's feet dangled from the shoulders to confuse evil spirits about which end was the head. The cloth itself was intentionally stained with berry juices in crooked lines, creating a broken pattern that malicious forces couldn't follow. These swaddles were never washed, just scorched with hot irons to kill lice while preserving the stains. Surviving examples in museums still show soot marks and faint berry discoloration after centuries. These rituals weren't just superstition. They forged village cohesion. When everyone participated in a child's risky early days, they became invested in its survival. Neighbors who'd added ingredients to your birth bath would later intervene if they saw you misbehaving. The blacksmith who gave that tiny scythe became an extra uncle checking your progress. This network of collective responsibility enabled Ukrainian communities to withstand hardships that broke other societies. The objects given at birth resurfaced throughout life. That miniature scythe became your first farming tool. The grave dirt might appear in your wedding bread. Even the placenta broth tradition continued. Married couples would receive jars of similar-looking soup during difficult times, hinting at the original ingredients without stating them outright. Every stage of existence tied back to those first chaotic days under the village's shared protection. This communal mindset shaped Ukrainian resilience. Individualism couldn't survive in a world where your naming ceremony involved half the town judging your infantile reflexes, or where your swaddling clothes contained the local priest's fingernail clippings for good luck. From birth, you belonged to something larger, a truth etched into bones by rituals modern parents would consider borderline abuse. That same collectivism extended to household items. Your cradle's protective marks were just the beginning. Ukrainian homes contained objects that served purposes far beyond their mundane appearances. The most surprising sat right by the bed, looking innocent until you learned its real function in the nightly battle against unseen forces. Every Ukrainian home kept a seemingly ordinary object by the bedside. A small wooden box you'd mistake for a jewelry case today, but inside weren't precious metals or gems. It held fingernail clippings, hair, and sometimes teeth, collected from the entire family over months. These weren't just kept as keepsakes. They served as nighttime guardians against evil spirits. People believed these personal remnants carried fragments of their life force, creating a protective barrier when stored together. Archaeologists find these boxes more often than religious icons in medieval Ukrainian digs. The best preserved one, discovered near Lviv in 2012, still contained human hair woven into complex patterns and tiny bones from a baby's first haircut. Many boxes show wear patterns suggesting daily handling, probably checked each night before sleep. The boxes weren't fancy, just simple pine with wax-sealed joints to trap their contents' power. The placement mattered as much as the contents. Boxes always sat on the left side of the bed, near the headboard. This aligned with the belief that evil approached from the left, while angels came from the right. Some had secret compartments underneath, holding more disturbing items. Burnt skin flakes from illnesses, or cloth stained with birth blood. Families periodically fed these boxes by adding fresh nail clippings and whispering requests for protection. These weren't passive containers either. Each full moon, the head of household would take the box outside, open it towards the moon, and rotate it 3 times clockwise. This recharged its protective powers, according to folk beliefs. Church records complain about this practice well into the 1700s, calling it pagan nonsense, which only made people perform the ritual more secretly. The boxes connected to broader Ukrainian death rituals too. When someone died, their personal box was immediately buried at the front door's threshold, creating a spiritual tripwire against death's return. Excavations at medieval homesteads consistently find these burial spots marked with upside-down pots or iron nails. Some graves contain miniature versions of the boxes, suggesting they followed owners into the afterlife. During famines or plagues, the boxes took on new importance. Families would add soil from their fields or small food scraps to share their hunger with the protective spirits. The most desperate would prick their fingers to add blood, a practice so common that some boxes have dark reddish stains permeating the wood. Children received their own box at age 3, usually decorated with protective symbols. The first items came from their baptism: burnt candle wax and a shred of the priest's robe. Parents taught kids to collect their own nail clippings, turning maintenance into a responsibility lesson. Woe to the child who lost their box. Punishments included sleeping in the barn until a replacement was made. Marriage merged 2 boxes' contents in a messy ritual. The couple would stand back to back, each holding their childhood box, then abruptly swap them while spitting over their left shoulders. The resulting mix of personal items symbolized family unity and supposedly created stronger spiritual protection. Divorces required carefully separating these combined collections, sometimes requiring village elders to mediate. The boxes influenced house design too. Beds were built slightly elevated on the left side to accommodate them, and nighttime storage niches were deliberately too small for anything else. Some wealthier homes had special shelves with carved depressions to prevent accidental falls, because a drop box meant 7 days of bad luck. They served practical purposes beyond superstition. The collected hair made excellent kindling for restarting dead fires, a lifesaver during brutal winters. Nail clippings found use in folk medicine, ground into powders believed to cure joint pain. Even the boxes themselves could be burned in emergencies, their wax seals making them burn slower than regular wood. Modern Ukrainians unknowingly preserve echoes of this tradition. Many homes still keep small decorative boxes on dressers or nightstands, though now they hold jewelry or spare change. The old superstitions faded, but the instinct to gather precious fragments in a special container remains. Ukrainian winters didn't just get cold. They turned homes into survival experiments. Families slept piled together like firewood, with grandparents at the center for maximum heat radiation. Children sandwiched between adults, livestock sometimes brought indoors, all sharing one massive bed that was really just a wooden platform covered in straw. The straw wasn't changed until spring. You just kept adding fresh layers on top until the house smelled like a barn. Archaeological digs in the Carpathians found bedding deposits nearly a foot thick in some homes. The bed itself was an engineering project called a povchka. It took up half the house and stood directly over the stove for residual warmth. Its elevated position created a heat trap. Warm air rose from the stove below, while body heat pooled in the straw. People slept fully clothed, including fur hats, because frost would form on the walls despite the fire. You'd wake up with your eyelashes frozen together if you slept too close to the exterior walls. Sleeping arrangements followed strict rules. Infants went between parents, not for bonding, but because their small bodies cooled fastest. Elderly relatives slept near the edge as human insulation against drafts. Teenagers drew the worst spots, either by the door where icy air seeped in, or directly above the stove where they roasted. Household records from 1587 mention parents tying restless children's ankles together to prevent them from kicking off shared blankets. The stove was the real lifeline. These massive clay structures took up a quarter of the home's floor space and stayed lit for months straight. Families took turns tending it through the night in 2-hour shifts. Letting the fire die wasn't just inconvenient, it could literally freeze the house shut by morning. Some stoves had hollow compartments where they'd stash heated stones before bed, pulling them out to re-warm feet at midnight. Wealthier families had sleeping cupboards built into walls, tiny enclosed bunks that trapped body heat like ovens. These weren't private spaces, though. You'd still pack in 2 or 3 people per cupboard. The richest nobles slept on feather beds that required 6 servants to flip the enormous mattresses daily. Even then, they often shared the bed with visiting relatives because empty space meant wasted warmth. Clothing became part of the bedding system. Day clothes doubled as pajamas, and outer garments became extra blankets. Families saved their most ragged furs specifically for winter sleeping. The more holes, the better they trapped body heat. Everyone removed their boots, but kept on multiple pairs of felted wool socks, some stuffed with dried moss for insulation. Nighttime bathroom trips were a production. You didn't just go outside, the outhouse might be buried under snow. Instead, families kept clay night pots under the bed, which everyone used in rotation. Emptying them at dawn became a dreaded chore since the contents would freeze solid if left too long. Some homes had special insulated porches for storing these pots overnight, where the sub-zero temperatures at least reduced the smell. Winter transformed household sounds. The constant crackling of the stove mixed with the rustle of straw and the chorus of chattering teeth. Snoring wasn't just annoying, it was dangerous because open mouths lost precious body heat. People trained children to sleep with lips pressed shut, sometimes pinching them awake if they heard mouth breathing. The system worked disturbingly well. Ukrainian homes maintained livable temperatures even during the Little Ice Age winters that killed thousands elsewhere in Europe. Their methods were so effective that Swedish occupiers during the Great Northern War copied the sleeping arrangements for their own troops. Modern thermal imaging studies show these multi-person sleeping platforms retained heat 40% better than individual beds in similar conditions. For all the discomfort, these practices built ironclad family bonds. You don't argue over blankets with someone who spent 6 months saving you from hypothermia. Shared hardship became shared identity. Surviving winter together meant you could trust each other in anything. The same communal spirit extended to craftspeople, whose workshops became winter gathering spots. Blacksmiths didn't just make tools. Their forges became makeshift community centers where people huddled together while waiting for repaired axes or horseshoes. The smith's fire was one of the few allowed to burn continuously besides home stoves, making their spaces vital refuges during blizzards. Blacksmiths developed their own winter rituals around these gatherings, transforming necessary work into spiritual ceremonies. They didn't just shape metal, they performed rituals that blended practicality with mysticism, harnessing both fire and faith to protect their communities. Every strike of the hammer carried layers of meaning beyond the immediate repair job at hand. Ukrainian blacksmiths didn't just shape metal, they performed rituals that straddled the line between craft and magic. In Kiev and Rus, these metalworkers held a unique position, forging tools and weapons while simultaneously acting as spiritual guardians for their communities. Their workshops weren't just workplaces, they were sacred spaces where fire, faith, and function intertwined. The most surprising aspect wasn't their skill with hammers, but how they blessed their tools in ceremonies that would seem bizarre to modern eyes. Isinki. Every new tool underwent an initiation ritual before use. The blacksmith would heat the implement in the forge until glowing, then plunge it not into water, but into a special mixture of herbal infusions and rainwater collected during thunderstorms. The steam was believed to carry prayers to the gods, while the hissing sound supposedly scared away evil spirits. Some smiths added crushed amber or bee venom to the liquid, creating a concoction that archaeologists have identified through residue analysis on ancient tools. The process left distinctive pockmarks on metal surfaces, marks that became badges of honor for properly blessed implements. The most sacred tool wasn't the hammer or anvil, But the tongs. These were never forged during daylight hours, only at twilight or under a full moon. Old guild records describe how apprentices had to collect the metal for tongs from three different sources: a plowshare, a weapon, and a hearth tool. This combination represented the blacksmith's three sacred duties: feeding, protecting, and warming the community. Finished tongs were wrapped in cloth woven by the smith's wife during her menstrual cycle, believed to imbue them with protective feminine energy. Blacksmiths developed unique forging chants that blended Christian prayers with older pagan verses. While Western European smiths recited standard blessings, Ukrainian metalworkers improvised rhymes based on the tool's intended use. A plow might get verses about rich harvests, while a sword received lines about shattering enemy bones. These weren't quiet murmurs. Smiths shouted them over the ringing hammer blows so the words would enter the metal through vibration. Ethnographers have recorded over 200 distinct forging chants from surviving oral traditions. The rituals extended to the workspace itself. Before starting each day's work, smiths drew symbolic patterns in the ashes of their forge using an iron rod. Common designs included modified solar symbols and stylized horses, both linked to pre-Christian deities. They believed these ash drawings prevented workplace accidents and ensured clean metal seams. The practice lasted well into the Christian era, though the symbols gradually became more abstract to avoid church disapproval. Tool blessings peaked during annual festivals honoring Svarog, the Slavic god of fire and forging. On these days, blacksmiths would gather at crossroads to perform mass consecrations. Each smith brought his most important tools, which were arranged in geometric patterns on the ground. A central fire was lit using wood from 9 different trees, and the group chanted while walking clockwise around the tools. Afterward, villagers would touch the newly blessed implements to transfer some of their power to personal items. Excavations at these festival sites reveal layers of ash containing tiny metal filings, evidence of repeated ceremonies over generations. Blacksmiths maintained strict purity rules during important commissions. When forging church bells or other sacred objects, they avoided sexual contact, didn't cut their hair or nails, and ate only cold food for the duration of the work. Some even slept in their workshops to maintain spiritual focus. These precautions weren't just superstition. They created a psychological state that helped craftsmen achieve exceptional quality. The famous Zvenigorod bells, known for their perfect tone, were all forged under these conditions. The spiritual aspect extended to repairing tools as well. Broken items weren't just fixed. They underwent a healing ceremony, where the smith symbolically stitched the fracture with copper wire while reciting spells. Agricultural tools received special attention. A sickle being repaired might have grains of wheat pressed into its molten joint line to restore its fertility. Farmers insisted tools repaired this way lasted longer than those fixed without ritual. Children's first tools came with their own blessings. When a boy received his initial hammer, the smith would purposely strike the child's thumb while saying, "Let the blood teach what words cannot." The resulting wound was dressed with forge ashes, creating a tattoo-like scar that marked the boy as a future craftsman. Girls getting their first needles had them pass through their hair 3 times to transfer feminine wisdom to the metal. These practices created tools that were more than functional objects. They became extensions of the community's spiritual life. A plow blessed with harvest chants wasn't just cutting soil, it was performing sacred work. A sword forged under ritual conditions carried the smith's prayers into battle. This mindset lasted until industrialization, when factory-made goods replaced handcrafted items. The blacksmith's day revolved around more than rituals. It followed strict timekeeping tied to natural cycles. While villages relied on church bells for daily structure, Smiths used their own system based on the forge's heat patterns and metal cooling times. They could estimate hours by how long a heated iron rod took to lose its glow, or predict seasonal changes by the way smoke curled from their chimneys. This intimate time sense connected them to the rhythms of the earth in ways that modern clock watchers can barely imagine. That precise timing carried over into community life. Villagers knew to come for tools when the smith's morning fire reached its peak heat, a visual signal more reliable than arbitrary clock hours. Apprentices learned to read these natural indicators before mastering metalwork itself. The blacksmith's workshop became an informal town clock, with different tasks signaling various times a day through sound, smell, and visible activity. This system worked so well that some remote villages continued using smith-based timekeeping into the early 20th century. Medieval Ukrainians didn't need clocks. Their days ran on bell time. The first chime at dawn, called matins, meant everyone got up whether they wanted to or not. Miss that signal, and you'd find yourself the only person still in bed while your neighbors started their day. The bells didn't just mark hours, they dictated actions. When the mid-morning terce bell rang, farmers stopped for breakfast. When sex sounded at noon, even arguments paused for prayer. So church bells controlled everything from market openings to when you could collect water. Villagers knew the sext bell meant the well would be crowded. Smart people fetched water at nones instead. But try drawing water during vespers and you'd get shouted at for disrupting prayer time. The schedule was so strict that millers scheduled grain grinding around bell patterns to avoid angering church officials. Monastic records from 1423 show 3 peasants fined for threshing wheat during Compline. These weren't gentle reminders. The bells shaped survival. In winter, their sound carried farther than human voices, guiding travelers through blizzards. During attacks, special alarm patterns sent people scrambling to fortified churches. Everyone knew the difference between a fire warning, 3 quick rings, and a Tatar raid signal, long drone, followed by rapid beats. Ignoring these could get you killed. In 1452, an entire village burned because they mistook a fire bell for a wedding chime. Medieval Ukrainians didn't need clocks. Their days ran on bell time. The first chime at dawn, called matins, meant everyone got up whether they wanted to or not. Miss that signal, and you'd find yourself the only person still in bed while your neighbors started their day. The bells didn't just mark hours, they dictated actions. When the mid-morning terce bell rang, farmers stopped for breakfast. When sex sounded at noon, even arguments paused for prayer. So church bells controlled everything from market openings to when you could collect water. Villagers knew the sext bell meant the well would be crowded. Smart people fetched water at nones instead. But try drawing water during vespers and you'd get shouted at for disrupting prayer time. The schedule was so strict that millers scheduled grain grinding around bell patterns to avoid angering church officials. Monastic records from 1423 show 3 peasants fined for threshing wheat during Compline. These weren't gentle reminders. The bells shaped survival. In winter, their sound carried farther than human voices, guiding travelers through blizzards. During attacks, special alarm patterns sent people scrambling to fortified churches. Everyone knew the difference between a fire warning, 3 quick rings, and a Tatar raid signal, long drone, followed by rapid beats. Ignoring these could get you killed. In 1452, an entire village burned because they mistook a fire bell for a wedding chime. The bells marked life stages too. Babies were baptized after lauds, couples married after sext, and the dying received last rites during vespers. Your entire existence unfolded according to their rhythm. Even death followed the pattern. Cemeteries only accepted bodies brought during specific bell times. A burial at the wrong hour meant leaving the coffin outside overnight, which everyone knew attracted evil spirits. Different regions had their own quirks. In western Ukraine, they rang bells backwards for funerals. Near Kiev, blacksmiths added metal scraps to the bell's clapper for a distinctive wartime sound. Some villages used coded sequences. 3 rings meant a birth, 5 meant someone important arrived. Travelers had to learn local patterns fast or risk missing crucial events. A merchant's diary from 1387 complains about arriving just after the wrong bell and waiting a full day to sell his goods. Children learned bell meanings through brutal games. Parents would shout, "What bell is that?" randomly and smack kids who guessed wrong. Some villages had bell rope duty as punishment. Troublemakers pulled ropes for hours until their hands blistered. The system worked because everyone feared being the person who slept through the harvest bell or missed a funeral call.
Night brought the only quiet. Complin's final chime signaled total darkness. No fires, no travel, just sleep. Except for the sleepless. Insomniacs counted bell towers instead of sheep, tracking how many villages they could hear in the still night air. Shepherds used distant bells to time guard shifts, while lovers listened for the single soft ring, signaling all clear for secret meetings. The strict schedule created odd social rules. You couldn't visit neighbors before prime. That was bell rudeness. Merchants who opened shops early got fined, while late closers faced boycotts. Even animals adapted. Chickens learned to wait for bells before crowing, and dogs stopped barking during prayer hours. Wealthy families bought private bells to cheat the system. Their servants rang miniature versions indoors, creating shadow schedules. This caused chaos when different households followed competing bell times. Church records show multiple complaints about noblewomen holding forbidden mid-prayer parties. Eventually, authorities banned private bells under penalty of confiscation. Several manor houses still have these confiscated bells displayed as humiliation trophies. The bell culture persisted because it worked. In a world without streetlights or calendars, shared timekeeping prevented chaos. When everyone responds to the same signal, you don't need locks on granaries or watches on children. The bells created order through sound, a network of audible rules keeping communities synchronized through good years and bad. This auditory control extended to medicine, too. Certain herbs could only be picked at specific bell times for full potency, and healers timed treatments to chime patterns. A fever broken during Vespers was considered more cured than one fading at random. The village bells didn't just mark hours. They shaped how people understood health itself. Healers claimed particular tones could drive out illness, while others attracted good humors. Their methods blended practical knowledge with beliefs that modern science rejects, yet survived for centuries in this bell-governed world. Medieval Ukrainian healers didn't just treat illnesses. They waged war against spirits using plants as weapons. Their medicine cabinets held equal parts herb and witchcraft, blending practical knowledge with rituals that would make modern doctors cringe. A fever wasn't just a fever. It was an evil spirit squatting in your body that needed eviction by any means necessary. The most shocking treatment involved sleeping sickness cures. Healers would take a live frog, sew it into a cloth pouch with 7 herbs, and hang it around the patient's neck for 3 days. If the frog died, the illness died with it. Skeletons excavated near Lviv show necklace vertebrae worn smooth from constant rubbing, probably from generations wearing these grim amphibian talismans. The treatment had some logic. Certain frog species secrete antimicrobial peptides through their skin, though nobody knew that at the time. Healing rituals followed strict timing rules. Certain herbs could only be picked at midnight on a full moon, others during specific church bells. Collecting plants at the wrong time rendered them useless, or worse, poisonous. One 14th century herbal guide lists 27 plants that turned treacherous if gathered after noon. Healers kept lunar calendars carved into birch bark to track optimal harvesting times, some of which still survive in monastery archives. Diagnosis involved equal parts observation and divination. A healer might examine your urine's color
then drop hot coals into it to read the bubbles. Certain patterns meant demonic possession. Others indicated blood corruption. The luckiest patients got diagnosed by sweeping, where the healer brushed their body with a broom, catching strands of wool on rough skin to identify problem areas. Parish records show some people preferred this to actual doctors because it hurt less than medieval European bloodletting. Childbirth involves some of the strangest practices. Midwives would place an axe under the birthing bed to cut the pain, while everyone present had to chew garlic to ward off evil spirits. The newborn's first bath often contained silver coins, not for wealth, but because the metal was believed to absorb impurities. Chemical analysis of soil from birth sites shows elevated silver levels centuries later, evidence of countless coins dissolving in wash water. Some treatments sound insane but had hidden logic. The maggot therapy for infected wounds, placing live fly larvae in sores to eat dead tissue, is still used in modern medicine. Healers kept special medicine boxes of maggots fed only on clean herbs to ensure they were safe. They didn't know about antibiotic secretions from maggots, but saw it work better than praying over pus-filled wounds. Mental health treatments were particularly creative. For depression, they'd bury the patient vertically up to their neck at a crossroads for 3 hours, claiming the passing traveler's energies would, quote, rebalance their spirits. Archaeological digs near old crossroads often find human-shaped depressions in the soil. Anxiety involved drinking tea brewed with iron nails that had been struck by lightning, a primitive attempt at shock therapy. The line between medicine and magic blurred completely in resurrection rituals. When someone seemed near death, healers would, quote, reconstruct their birth, wrapping them in the mother's old clothes, singing lullabies, even pretending to cut an invisible umbilical cord. Church records complain about this practice well into the 1700s, noting it sometimes worked enough to anger local priests. Healing spaces were designed for spiritual warfare. Treatment rooms always faced east, with 3 windows at specific heights to let in, quote, good air while keeping out evil spirits. The healer's table held ritual objects alongside herbs, usually an iron knife, a bowl of salt, and a wooden doll that represented the patient during absent treatments. Excavated healer huts showed distinctive floor patterns where these items were placed for centuries. Some cures traded one problem for another. The go-to for arthritis involved bee stings to the affected joints, painful but effective given bee venom's anti-inflammatory properties. For toothaches, they packed the mouth with moldy bread, inadvertently dosing patients with early penicillin. Chronic pain sufferers got to sit on anthills, the formic acid possibly helping more than the recommended prayers. The most respected healers were often women past childbearing age, believed to carry accumulated wisdom. Their knowledge wasn't written down but memorized through rhyming chants that encoded herb combinations. Modern linguists have reconstructed some, finding surprisingly accurate medical information buried in the poetry, like a chant for wound care that lists plants now known to contain clotting agents. These practices weren't backwards, they were adaptive. Ukrainian folk medicine had to work without hospitals or trained doctors for centuries. The rituals gave psychological comfort, while the actual herbs did the heavy lifting. Some preparations contained effective doses of pain relievers, anti-inflammatories, and even early antibiotics, all wrapped in spiritual practices that helped patients believe in the cure. While Western European medicine was busy bleeding people with leeches, Ukrainian healers at least aimed to do no harm, even if their methods seem bizarre today. Many modern Ukrainians still use versions of these remedies, proving that sometimes tradition survives because it actually works. These healing rituals reveal a society that saw disease not as random misfortune, but as a puzzle to be solved with every tool available, both practical and supernatural. The same practical spirituality shaped Ukrainian social structures, where your place in society determined everything from what you ate to how you were punished. While healers treated individuals, the community maintained its own complex system of rules and hierarchies that kept everyone in their assigned roles, for better or worse.
Your place in medieval Ukrainian society determined everything, even how much your murder would cost. The Rus Truth legal codes laid out precise fines. Kill a prince and your entire family might be executed. Kill a peasant? That'd be 5 silver hryvnias, please. The system didn't just divide people into classes, it assigned them literal price tags. At the top sat the princes, living in relative luxury but with constant targets on their backs. They slept in chambers lined with imported tapestries, ate off silver plates, and wore silk-lined furs, but also rotated castles every few months to avoid assassination. Their children learned Greek and Latin while playing with chess sets carved from walrus ivory. Yet court records show even princes feared poison tasters more than foreign armies. The boyars formed the real power structure. These landowners controlled villages like personal fiefdoms, taking portions of every harvest. Unlike Western European nobles, Ukrainian boyars could lose status overnight if the prince disapproved of them. Some kept insurance families, entire second households hidden in remote forests with enough wealth to restart if disgraced. Archaeologists find these hidden manor sites stocked with foreign coins and weapons, ready for sudden political falls. Merchants occupied an odd middle ground. Successful ones could rival boyars in wealth, but faced legal restrictions on land ownership. Their remedy? Buying merchant patents from corrupt officials that secretly granted noble privileges. Some traded these like currency. Court documents reveal cases where a single patent changed hands 12 times in a year. The luckiest merchants married into boyar families, though these unions were considered scandalous. Dowry lists show merchant brides brought absurdly inflated gifts to compensate for their low blood. Artisans lived by specialty rules. Blacksmiths and armorers ranked highest, their workshops often doubling as unofficial courts where disputes got settled over hammer strikes. Weavers and potters came next, then musicians at the bottom, many forced to perform for scraps at boyar gates. Guild laws prohibited artisans from changing trades, creating dynasties where 10 generations made nothing but boots. Excavated workshop floors show children's tiny fingerprints in dried clay alongside adult marks. The clergy played both sides. Orthodox priests collected tithes like taxes, but also operated the only real social mobility path. Smart peasant boys could seminary hop their way to bishop status, though church records reveal constant infighting. One 14th century diary complains about a bishop who acquired 7 villages through blackmail, then lost them gambling on dice games. Peasants made up most of the population, but had the least protection. They weren't quite serfs yet, technically free to move, though debts usually anchored them to land. The Rus Truth set their ware guild at 5 hryvnias, less than a good horse. Their homes show ingenious adaptations, hidden floor compartments for grain stores disguised as dirt, false hearthbacks for quick escape during raids. Winter was the great equalizer. Boyars might have fur coats, but everyone huddled around similar smoky stoves. Slaves faced the harshest reality. Most were prisoners of war or debtors, though some parents sold children during famines. They performed brutal tasks like salt mining or bog iron harvesting. Legal codes treated them as property. Kill someone else's slave, and you just paid the owner replacement cost. The luckiest slaves worked kitchens, where they could at least steal food. Skeletal remains show slaves died younger,
with distinctive joint damage from constant, heavy labor. The system's cracks appeared in inheritance laws. When a boyar died without sons, his estate should have reverted to the prince. Clever families exploited loopholes by having daughters adopt male relatives who took their names. Some invented entirely fake genealogies. Archive scrolls reveal frantic scribbles where clerks tried tracking these fabricated lineages. Marriage laws reinforced divisions. Peasants needed lord permission to wed outside their village. Merchants paid special taxes for status-mixing weddings. Noble marriages required Byzantine-level negotiations over linen counts and dowries. One contract from 1392 specifies exactly 17 sheets of Burgundian weave, or the deal was off. Broken engagements could trigger blood feuds lasting generations. The Cossacks blew up this entire system. When runaway peasants formed armed bands on the steppe, they created a society where your combat skills mattered more than your birth. Their villages had no boyars, just elected leaders who slept in the same huts as everyone else. Polish magnates were horrified when Cossacks refused to bow, addressing nobles as equals. This egalitarian streak had limits, though. While Western European feudalism calcified over centuries, Ukrainian society kept some fluidity. A lucky peasant could become a wealthy merchant. A disgraced boyar might fall to peasant status overnight. The bones tell this story. Cemeteries show nobles buried with peasant tools after political falls. Former merchants crammed into slave quarters after bankruptcies. The legacy persists in modern Ukrainian attitudes toward authority. That deep suspicion of concentrated power, it comes from centuries watching boyars and princes play games with human lives. The emphasis on personal resilience, a product of surviving in a system where your value was literally priced lower than livestock. These social structures shaped every ritual we've discussed, from peasant birth charms meant to protect low-value babies to noble drinking games reinforcing status. The hierarchy wasn't just background, it was the operating system for medieval Ukrainian life. That system left physical marks too. The next time you see Ukrainian folk architecture, notice how the designs reflect this fractured world. Peasant homes built to be quickly abandoned, boyar manors with hidden panic rooms, Cossack settlements arranged for mutual defense. The buildings preserved what the documents often lied about. Ukrainian homes weren't just shelters, they were spiritual fortresses built to code. Every beam, corner, and threshold had rules governing its placement. The most surprising feature, windows never faced west. People believed the setting sun carried evil spirits straight into houses. Archaeologists find west-facing walls packed solid with clay in old settlements, while east-facing sides have triple the usual window openings. The three-zone layout governed every dwelling. Nearest the door sat the dark zone for tools and dirty work. The central living zone held the hearth and eating area. Furthest inside was the clean zone, where icons hung and guests slept. This wasn't practical. It mimicked the Slavic cosmos. Chaos at the edges, order at the center. Excavated homes show wear patterns confirming this. Dirt floors near entries are worn smooth from constant traffic, while back areas stay surprisingly pristine. Thresholds were death traps, according to superstition anyway. Builders buried horse skulls under doorways, placed metal nails in the frame, and sometimes even interred stillborn animals beneath them. These weren't just folk beliefs. Carbon dating shows some skulls were decades older than the houses above them, meaning families carried these protectors between homes. The obsession made sense when you realize most home invasions happened through doorways back then. Walls told secret stories. Before plastering, families pressed protective symbols into the wet clay. Swastikas, called solar wheels, then crosses, and crude animal shapes. Some mark spots where relatives had died. Infrared scans reveal layers upon layers of these symbols under whitewash, suggesting annual renewals. The symbols clustered near beds and food storage areas, showing what people valued most: Roof designs followed water spirits' rules. Thatched roofs used specific grasses braided in patterns said to confuse demons. The ridgepole always had carved horse heads at either end. Not decoration, but spiritual lightning rods. When Christianity arrived, people just swapped them for crosses, but kept calling them horses. Some thatch bundles contain hidden herbs. Chemical analysis shows traces of mugwort and nettle, both believed to repel evil. The oven wasn't just for cooking, it was the home's soul. Its placement followed strict rules. Always in the northeast corner, never touching exterior walls. Families fed it small offerings before first use each winter, usually bread crusts or honey. Archaeologists find these carbonized offerings perfectly preserved in old hearths. The oven's heat channels under sleeping platforms weren't just cozy. They symbolized the womb, connecting family members to the hearth's life force. Storage spaces doubled as spiritual safes. Grain bins had secret compartments for family artifacts. Baby teeth, wedding ribbons, ancestors' hair. Some were accessed through false bottoms or hidden wall flaps. The bins themselves were painted with fertility grids of red and black squares. Chemical tests revealed the paint contained actual ground-up crops, likely for sympathetic magic ensuring future harvests. Sleeping arrangements followed cosmic rules. Beds aligned with summer sunrise angles, ensuring souls stayed connected to heavenly cycles. Pillows contained small sacks of graveyard soil for protection. Parents told kids it was just herbs. Remnants show these pouches also held bird bones and teeth, probably from protective animals like owls or wolves. The bed's wooden frames were deliberately rough cut. Smooth wood was believed to attract lightning. Animal integration seemed bizarre but made sense. Families shared winter quarters with livestock, not just for warmth. They thought animal breath purified the air. Chicken coops were built into wall cavities so hens could nest near sleeping areas, not for eggs, but because their morning crowing kept evil night spirits away. Dung analysis shows they fed these chickens special seeds to make them crow louder. The wealthiest homes had spirit gaps, small openings near ceilings, supposedly letting good energy circulate while trapping bad ones. These weren't vents. Their placement followed no logical airflow pattern. Some had tiny bells hung inside that rang when spirits passed through. Metal detectors find these bells buried near old manor sites, usually with protective runes etched inside where no one could see. Outbuildings repeated the sacred geometry. Barns replicated house designs in miniature, down to the threshold protections. Even gardens followed rules. Certain crops planted only in male or female soil patches, determined by secret divination rites. Excavated garden plots show bizarre crop rotations, matching no practical farming manual, but aligning perfectly with lunar calendars found scribbled on birch bark. The system worked because it was adaptable. When Mongol invasions forced people into fortified towns, they rebuilt their spiritual safeguards in stone. When Polish rule brought Western designs, Ukrainians just hid their symbols under plaster. The beliefs weren't about architecture. They were about maintaining cosmic order in an unpredictable world. That order extended to food preparation, too. The same ovens that heated homes and scared spirits also produced meals following strict spiritual rules. What you ate, how it was cooked, even who served it, wasn't just about nutrition. It was about keeping balance in a world full of invisible threats. The kitchen wasn't separate from religion here. It was the religion's beating heart.
Your bowl of porridge in medieval Ukraine wasn't just breakfast. It was a spiritual contract with ancestors. Families believed the first spoonful thrown into the fire fed the dead, creating an eerie crackle as moisture hit hot coals. This wasn't occasional. It happened before every meal, even during famines when every bite counted. You'd see children carefully blowing on their spoonfuls first, not to cool them, but to wake up the ancestors before offering. The ritual foods followed strict seasonal cycles. Kucha, the sweet wheat pudding eaten at winter holidays, wasn't just tasty. Each ingredient carried meaning. The wheat symbolized resurrection, its sprouts after burial. The honey stood for prosperity, and poppy seeds represented the Milky Way connecting earth to heaven. Families prepared it in complete silence, believing spoken words could contaminate its power. Leftovers weren't thrown out but smeared on fruit trees to transfer the pudding's vitality to next year's harvest. Bread rituals bordered on obsessive. Before baking, women pressed their wedding rings into the dough to bless it. The first loaf from every batch was stabbed with a knife before baking, not to vent steam, but to let evil spirits escape. Uneaten crusts were never discarded. They went into special clay pots called dobrodyki that hung by the stove until full, then were emptied at crossroads as offerings to spirits. Archaeologists find these pots everywhere, some still crusted with centuries-old bread fragments. Meat preparation involved blood rituals. When slaughtering livestock, families caught the first blood in a birch bark cup kept for generations. They dipped fingers in it to mark door frames, then mixed the rest with grain as animal feed. The belief was straightforward: men should nurture life. Butchers developed secret cutting techniques to preserve sacred veins, thought to contain spiritual essence. Screwing this up meant bad luck for the whole village. The hearth wasn't just for cooking, it was a divine witness. Before important meals, the housewife would circle the pot 3 times with a burning branch while reciting names of dead relatives. The smoke carried their spirits to the table. Pots themselves had ritual significance. New ones were baptized by boiling water with coins and herbs before first use. Broken cookware got buried under fruit trees, not tossed. Its shards still held protective power. Drinking customs turned alcohol into liturgy. The communal cup passed clockwise only, with each sip preceded by eye contact and a nod to the east. Spilling was catastrophic. They believed wasted drink attracted poverty spirits. Mead wasn't just fermented. It aged in barrels containing silver coins and oak leaves, which added both flavor and, they thought, spiritual purification. Wedding celebrations involved drinking exactly 13 toasts, one for each month plus a spare for unexpected blessings. Your bowl of porridge in medieval Ukraine wasn't just breakfast. It was a spiritual contract with ancestors. Families believed the first spoonful thrown into the fire fed the dead, creating an eerie crackle as moisture hit hot coals. This wasn't occasional. It happened before every meal, even during famines when every bite counted. You'd see children carefully blowing on their spoonfuls first, not to cool them, but to wake up the ancestors before offering. The ritual foods followed strict seasonal cycles. Kucha, the sweet wheat pudding eaten at winter holidays, wasn't just tasty, each ingredient carried meaning. The wheat symbolized resurrection, its sprouts after burial. The honey stood for prosperity, and poppy seeds represented the Milky Way connecting earth to heaven. Families prepared it in complete silence, believing spoken words could contaminate its power. Leftovers weren't thrown out but smeared on fruit trees to transfer the pudding's vitality to next year's harvest. Bread rituals bordered on obsessive. Before baking, women pressed their wedding rings into the dough to bless it. The first loaf from every batch was stabbed with a knife before baking, not to vent steam, but to let evil spirits escape. Uneaten crusts were never discarded. They went into special clay pots called dobrodyki that hung by the stove until full, then were emptied at crossroads as offerings to spirits. Archaeologists find these pots everywhere, some still crusted with centuries-old bread fragments. Meat preparation involved blood rituals. When slaughtering livestock, families caught the first blood in a birch bark cup kept for generations. They dipped fingers in it to mark door frames, then mixed the rest with grain as animal feed. The belief was straightforward: men should nurture life. Butchers developed secret cutting techniques to preserve sacred veins, thought to contain spiritual essence. Screwing this up meant bad luck for the whole village. The hearth wasn't just for cooking, it was a divine witness. Before important meals, the housewife would circle the pot 3 times with a burning branch while reciting names of dead relatives. The smoke carried their spirits to the table. Pots themselves had ritual significance. New ones were baptized by boiling water with coins and herbs before first use. Broken cookware got buried under fruit trees, not tossed. Its shards still held protective power. Drinking customs turned alcohol into liturgy. The communal cup passed clockwise only, with each sip preceded by eye contact and a nod to the east. Spilling was catastrophic. They believed wasted drink attracted poverty spirits. Mead wasn't just fermented. It aged in barrels containing silver coins and oak leaves, which added both flavor and, they thought, spiritual purification. Wedding celebrations involved drinking exactly 13 toasts, one for each month plus a spare for unexpected blessings. Your bowl of porridge in medieval Ukraine wasn't just breakfast. It was a spiritual contract with ancestors. Families believed the first spoonful thrown into the fire fed the dead, creating an eerie crackle as moisture hit hot coals. This wasn't occasional. It happened before every meal, even during famines when every bite counted. You'd see children carefully blowing on their spoonfuls first, not to cool them, but to wake up the ancestors before offering. The ritual foods followed strict seasonal cycles. Kucha, the sweet wheat pudding eaten at winter holidays, wasn't just tasty, each ingredient carried meaning. The wheat symbolized resurrection, its sprouts after burial. The honey stood for prosperity, and poppy seeds represented the Milky Way connecting earth to heaven. Families prepared it in complete silence, believing spoken words could contaminate its power. Leftovers weren't thrown out but smeared on fruit trees to transfer the pudding's vitality to next year's harvest. Bread rituals bordered on obsessive. Before baking, women pressed their wedding rings into the dough to bless it. The first loaf from every batch was stabbed with a knife before baking, not to vent steam, but to let evil spirits escape. Uneaten crusts were never discarded. They went into special clay pots called dobrodaiki that hung by the stove until full, then were emptied at crossroads as offerings to spirits. Archaeologists find these pots everywhere, some still crusted with centuries-old bread fragments. Meat preparation involved blood rituals. When slaughtering livestock, families caught the first blood in a birch bark cup kept for generations. They dipped fingers in it to mark door frames, then mixed the rest with grain as animal feed. The belief was straightforward: should nurture life. Butchers developed secret cutting techniques to preserve sacred veins, thought to contain spiritual essence. Screwing this up meant bad luck for the whole village. The hearth wasn't just for cooking, it was a divine witness. Before important meals, the housewife would circle the pot 3 times with a burning branch while reciting names of dead relatives. The smoke carried their spirits to the table. Pots themselves had ritual significance. New ones were baptized by boiling water with coins and herbs before first use. Broken cookware got buried under fruit trees, not tossed. Its shards still held protective power. Drinking customs turned alcohol into liturgy. The communal cup passed clockwise only, with each sip preceded by eye contact and a nod to the east. Spilling was catastrophic. They believed wasted drink attracted poverty spirits. Mead wasn't just fermented. It aged in barrels containing silver coins and oak leaves, which added both flavor and, they thought, spiritual purification. Wedding celebrations involved drinking exactly 13 toasts, one for each month plus a spare for unexpected blessings. Your bowl of porridge in medieval Ukraine wasn't just breakfast. It was a spiritual contract with ancestors. Families believed the first spoonful thrown into the fire fed the dead, creating an eerie crackle as moisture hit hot coals. This wasn't occasional. It happened before every meal, even during famines when every bite counted. You'd see children carefully blowing on their spoonfuls first, not to cool them, but to wake up the ancestors before offering. The ritual foods followed strict seasonal cycles. Kucha, the sweet wheat pudding eaten at winter holidays, wasn't just tasty, each ingredient carried meaning. The wheat symbolized resurrection, its sprouts after burial. The honey stood for prosperity, and poppy seeds represented the Milky Way connecting earth to heaven. Families prepared it in complete silence, believing spoken words could contaminate its power. Leftovers weren't thrown out but smeared on fruit trees to transfer the pudding's vitality to next year's harvest. Bread rituals bordered on obsessive. Before baking, women pressed their wedding rings into the dough to bless it. The first loaf from every batch was stabbed with a knife before baking, not to vent steam, but to let evil spirits escape. Uneaten crusts were never discarded. They went into special clay pots called dobrodaiki that hung by the stove until full, then were emptied at crossroads as offerings to spirits. Archaeologists find these pots everywhere, some still crusted with centuries-old bread fragments. Meat preparation involved blood rituals. When slaughtering livestock, families caught the first blood in a birch bark cup kept for generations. They dipped fingers in it to mark door frames, then mixed the rest with grain as animal feed. The belief was straightforward: should nurture life. Butchers developed secret cutting techniques to preserve sacred veins, thought to contain spiritual essence. Screwing this up meant bad luck for the whole village. The hearth wasn't just for cooking, it was a divine witness. Before important meals, the housewife would circle the pot 3 times with a burning branch while reciting names of dead relatives. The smoke carried their spirits to the table. Pots themselves had ritual significance. New ones were baptized by boiling water with coins and herbs before first use. Broken cookware got buried under fruit trees, not tossed. Its shards still held protective power. Drinking customs turned alcohol into liturgy. The communal cup passed clockwise only, with each sip preceded by eye contact and a nod to the east. Spilling was catastrophic. They believed wasted drink attracted poverty spirits. Mead wasn't just fermented. It aged in barrels containing silver coins and oak leaves, which added both flavor and, they thought, spiritual purification. Wedding celebrations involved drinking exactly 13 toasts, one for each month plus a spare for unexpected blessings. Your bowl of porridge in medieval Ukraine wasn't just breakfast. It was a spiritual contract with ancestors. Families believed the first spoonful thrown into the fire fed the dead, creating an eerie crackle as moisture hit hot coals. This wasn't occasional. It happened before every meal, even during famines when every bite counted. You'd see children carefully blowing on their spoonfuls first, not to cool them, but to wake up the ancestors before offering. The ritual foods followed strict seasonal cycles. Kucha, the sweet wheat pudding eaten at winter holidays, wasn't just tasty, each ingredient carried meaning. The wheat symbolized resurrection, its sprouts after burial. The honey stood for prosperity, and poppy seeds represented the Milky Way connecting earth to heaven. Families prepared it in complete silence, believing spoken words could contaminate its power. Leftovers weren't thrown out but smeared on fruit trees to transfer the pudding's vitality to next year's harvest. Bread rituals bordered on obsessive. Before baking, women pressed their wedding rings into the dough to bless it. The first loaf from every batch was stabbed with a knife before baking, not to vent steam, but to let evil spirits escape. Uneaten crusts were never discarded. They went into special clay pots called dobrodaiki that hung by the stove until full, then were emptied at crossroads as offerings to spirits. Archaeologists find these pots everywhere, some still crusted with centuries-old bread fragments. Meat preparation involved blood rituals. When slaughtering livestock, families caught the first blood in a birch bark cup kept for generations. They dipped fingers in it to mark door frames, then mixed the rest with grain as animal feed. The belief was straightforward: men should nurture life. Butchers developed secret cutting techniques to preserve sacred veins, thought to contain spiritual essence. Screwing this up meant bad luck for the whole village. The hearth wasn't just for cooking, it was a divine witness. Before important meals, the housewife would circle the pot 3 times with a burning branch while reciting names of dead relatives. The smoke carried their spirits to the table. Pots themselves had ritual significance. New ones were baptized by boiling water with coins and herbs before first use. Broken cookware got buried under fruit trees, not tossed. Its shards still held protective power. Drinking customs turned alcohol into liturgy. The communal cup passed clockwise only, with each sip preceded by eye contact and a nod to the east. Spilling was catastrophic. They believed wasted drink attracted poverty spirits. Mead wasn't just fermented. It aged in barrels containing silver coins and oak leaves, which added both flavor and, they thought, spiritual purification. Wedding celebrations involved drinking exactly 13 toasts, one for each month plus a spare for unexpected blessings. Your bowl of porridge in medieval Ukraine wasn't just breakfast. It was a spiritual contract with ancestors. Families believed the first spoonful thrown into the fire fed the dead, creating an eerie crackle as moisture hit hot coals. This wasn't occasional. It happened before every meal, even during famines when every bite counted. You'd see children carefully blowing on their spoonfuls first, not to cool them, but to wake up the ancestors before offering. The ritual foods followed strict seasonal cycles. Kucha, the sweet wheat pudding eaten at winter holidays, wasn't just tasty, each ingredient carried meaning. The wheat symbolized resurrection, its sprouts after burial. The honey stood for prosperity, and poppy seeds represented the Milky Way connecting earth to heaven. Families prepared it in complete silence, believing spoken words could contaminate its power. Leftovers weren't thrown out but smeared on fruit trees to transfer the pudding's vitality to next year's harvest. bread rituals bordered on obsessive. Before baking, women pressed their wedding rings into the dough to bless it. The first loaf from every batch was stabbed with a knife before baking, not to vent steam, but to let evil spirits escape. Uneaten crusts were never discarded. They went into special clay pots called dobrodyki that hung by the stove until full, then were emptied at crossroads as offerings to spirits. Archaeologists find these pots everywhere, some still crusted with centuries-old bread fragments. Meat preparation involved blood rituals. When slaughtering livestock, families caught the first blood in a birch bark cup kept for generations. They dipped fingers in it to mark door frames, then mixed the rest with grain as animal feed. The belief was straightforward: men should nurture life. Butchers developed secret cutting techniques to preserve sacred veins, thought to contain spiritual essence. Screwing this up meant bad luck for the whole village. The hearth wasn't just for cooking, it was a divine witness. Before important meals, the housewife would circle the pot 3 times with a burning branch while reciting names of dead relatives. The smoke carried their spirits to the table. Pots themselves had ritual significance. New ones were baptized by boiling water with coins and herbs before first use. Broken cookware got buried under fruit trees, not tossed. Its shards still held protective power. Drinking customs turned alcohol into liturgy. The communal cup passed clockwise only, with each sip preceded by eye contact and a nod to the east. Spilling was catastrophic. They believed wasted drink attracted poverty spirits. Mead wasn't just fermented. It aged in barrels containing silver coins and oak leaves, which added both flavor and, they thought, spiritual purification. Wedding celebrations involved drinking exactly 13 toasts, one for each month plus a spare for unexpected blessings.
Ukrainian traditions from the Middle Ages didn't disappear. They went underground and resurfaced in modern disguises. Take the humble Easter egg. What most people see as a colorful craft started as a pagan talisman against evil spirits. The intricate patterns aren't just decorations. They're coded symbols that medieval Slavs believed warded off demons. Today's grandmothers teaching these designs to grandchildren might not know their origins, but the motifs remain identical to those scratched onto 12th century clay shards found near Kiev. Garlic wreaths on doors show similar staying power. What looks like rustic decor actually continues an ancient practice. Medieval Ukrainians hung garlic to repel plague spirits. Now it's explained as just for flavor. The bunches still follow the old rules, exactly 13 heads woven clockwise with oak leaves tucked between them. Supermarkets sell modern versions, but traditional families insist on homegrown garlic braided during the waning moon, exactly as their ancestors did. Some survival stories are darker. The tradition of covering mirrors after someone dies began as a way to trap vengeful spirits. Today's Ukrainians call it respect for the dead, but the practice matches pre-Christian burial customs down to the specific cloth used, always linen, never wool. Funeral homes still quietly observe the old rule about never placing the coffin where sunlight hits before noon, though few could explain why this matters. Agricultural rituals adapted particularly well. The first sheaf of wheat cut during harvest still gets decorated and kept until spring, a direct carryover from pagan offering customs. Modern farmers might say it's for good luck, but their great-grandparents knew it as a sacrifice to the field spirit. Combine harvesters didn't erase this tradition, they just made the ceremonial sheaf smaller. Some villages even maintain the medieval practice of burying bread at field corners after harvest, though now it's store-bought loaves instead of home-baked ones. Children's folk games preserve medieval warrior training. The popular Cossacks and Robbers isn't just play acting, it teaches the same stealth and tracking skills young boys learned in the 1600s. The stone test from initiation rites survives as a playground dare where kids balance on rocks. Even the jump rope rhyme about counting Cossacks comes from a 15th century method of tracking troop numbers through song. Winter celebrations show the clearest blends. The Christmas spider ornament, that comes from a pre-Christian legend about a poor woman's decorations magically turning to gold.
The tradition of 12 meatless dishes on Christmas Eve mirrors the old Slavic winter solstice feast. Families that keep these customs often don't realize they're maintaining a medieval menu, the recipes passed down unchanged for generations. Language cements these connections. Ukrainian retains medieval terms most languages lost. The word vikno, window, still carries its original meaning, windai, from when houses had tiny openings covered with animal bladder. Sayings like, "don't whistle indoors," originate in beliefs about summoning storms. Even modern insults preserve ancient power. Calling someone a moon-faced fool references the Slavic moon god's supposed gullibility. Urbanization created new twists on old traditions. Apartment dwellers can't bury bread at field edges, so they crumble it on balcony plants. City festivals incorporate medieval dances once performed in village squares. The Lviv Chocolate Festival looks modern, but its centerpiece, a giant chocolate sculpture, mirrors the honey idols Ukrainians made for harvest celebrations 1,000 years ago. Some revivals are deliberate. Historical societies have reconstructed Cossack battle techniques as cultural heritage. What began as academic interest became serious when these skills helped during the 2014 conflict. Reports mention soldiers using old steppe warfare tactics against separatist forces. Similarly, traditional herbal remedies gained new popularity during medicine shortages, proving their worth beyond folklore. The military connection runs deep. Modern Ukrainian soldiers still receive embroidered protection shirts based on Cossack designs. The intricate patterns aren't just decoration. They replicate patterns believed to deflect arrows and blades. Officers report some troops insisting these shirts work better than issued gear, though they'd never say so officially. Food traditions adapted surprisingly well to globalization. McDonald's in Ukraine serves beet soup, a medieval staple. Supermarkets sell korovai, the ritual wedding bread once baked only by village collectives. Even fast versions keep key elements: the braided shape symbolizing eternity, the hidden compartment for good luck tokens. Religion maintains these links subtly. Priests might condemn paganism, but their churches use the same three-barred crosses favored in Kievan Rus. The onion domes aren't just architectural. Their shapes recall the sacred oaks of Slavic groves. Some clergy quietly bless fields with methods indistinguishable from pagan rites, simply changing the names invoked. The persistence isn't accidental. Ukraine's history of foreign rule made cultural preservation a silent resistance. Peasants pretended to convert while maintaining traditions at home. The Soviet era pushed these practices further underground, but couldn't erase them. What outsiders called superstition was actually cultural survival, a way to maintain identity under pressure. These living traditions reveal what textbooks can't, how people actually experienced history. The Easter eggs, garlic wreaths, and folk songs aren't relics, but the unbroken thread connecting modern Ukrainians to their medieval ancestors. They prove culture isn't just about grand events, but daily acts of remembering, even when the original reasons fade. The endurance of these practices shows something fundamental about Ukrainian identity. It's not just resilience, but adaptability, the ability to take what the modern world offers while keeping one foot firmly in tradition. The past isn't dead here. It's just been quietly repurposed for contemporary life, waiting to be recognized by those who know where to look. This blending of old and new continues shaping Ukraine's future, even as it honors its past. The same practicality that preserved medieval traditions through centuries of upheaval now helps navigate 21st century challenges, proving that some ways of being transcend time itself. These rituals show how medieval Ukrainians balanced survival with spirituality. Practical solutions doubled as sacred acts, whether storing fingernail clippings or structuring homes around cosmic rules. The traditions weren't just superstition. They forged identity through centuries of foreign rule. Modern Ukraine still carries traces of this mindset, blending old and new in ways outsiders often miss. That garlic wreath, more than decor. Those embroidered shirts, not just fashion. The past lingers in daily habits, even when the original meaning fades. The resilience didn't disappear, it adapted. Ukraine's history lives in these small, stubborn continuities between then and now.